There are countless variations on the cartoon of the sage sitting at the top of a lonely mountain peak and some poor supplicant trying to make it all the way up to the top and then falling at the feet of the sage and asking his question. And so when the sage reaches one of them, is the supplicant finally gets there, and he asks the holy sage, how can I become free? And he says, well, renounce everything, take 1 meal a day of nettles, never have any money, have no closer relationships. And then the supplicant looks at the sage and he said, is there anybody else here I can talk to? I think after Jesus made that declaration, a lot of his disciples would say, is there anybody else? Can I get a second opinion on this one? I mean, it's fierce. There's just no way we can read those verses in the Bible and sort of twist them into something light. It's, from a certain perspective, absolutely chilling. So many different things pass in front of me in the course of a week. I sometimes lose track of where things happen. It may have actually been right here, talking about the power that Master has. Oh no, I know what it was. It was in Conversations with Yogananda. And there was a whole entry in the notes that Swami took when he was living with Master about how different people perceived Master in different ways. I remember Swamiji saying to me once after he'd finished writing The Path, just in very casual conversation, he said, there's something I just didn't know how to put into my autobiography of life with Master. He said, Master was just so cute. He said he was just absolutely adorable. He was charming. He was sort of small and a little pudgy. He was extremely whimsical, and he was just so darling. But Swami said he just didn't know how to write that in his autobiography in a way that would actually take people where he wanted them to go. But then in this entry in Conversations, he was talking about how, in every avatar, when an avatar comes into the world, he brings many of his advanced disciples with him for their sake, because this is their opportunity to finish whatever is remaining for themselves to become as free as the Master is. He also brings his disciples with him because the Master's not coming for any purpose of his own. He's coming in order to create, especially an avatar comes. An avatar comes with an assignment, and a world-changing one. That's the characteristic of a great Master in this way. It's not that his consciousness is more free than a free soul who's just living in a cave somewhere, but he has a job to do. And if you're going to do a job in which you're going to have to influence the direction of the planet that you're assigned to, it's a hard job to do by yourself. Also, the atmosphere of this planet is not really all that congenial for someone whose consciousness is purely spiritual. Of course, in higher ages, it's more congenial. Jesus had a very tough assignment coming in Kali Yuga descending, where not only was he scorned and persecuted, he was outright killed. Coming as Master did, Kali Yuga translating into, moving into Dwapara, things are a little better. But even as he himself said, he had to live through 3 world wars, 3 wars. He mentioned that Lahiri was lucky because there was no war going on the planet when Lahiri was living, but Master had to live through 3 wars. For a soul whose consciousness is omnipresent and experiences every individual as poignantly as he experiences himself, you can just imagine. Even just from where I sit in my little life, you hear about some tragic situation here or some outrageous possibility over here, and it's very painful. And imagine if you actually were able to feel that. Lahiri, the story is told in autobiography, exclaiming suddenly, I'm drowning off the coast of Japan. A ship had gone down. He's meditating in his living room in Varanasi, And suddenly he exclaims with the consciousness of the people who at that moment were drowning, as the news report brought up. So in such a reality, a master needs also to have around him souls of a sympathetic nature, whose vibration is similar to his own, whose loyalty is entirely to him, and who can support him, who will understand what he's trying to do. In a very poignant way, I read in Sister Gyanamata's book a letter that she had written. It was actually written to Ananda Mata, although it's not mentioned. Ananda Mata was one of Yogananda's very close disciples, the actual birth sister of Dayamata, who was the president. And something had happened in which Master was physically suffering because he was working out on his own physical body in that form the karma of his disciples, of some of his disciples. Most of the time, I would say all the time, most of the time when a great soul suffers, all the time when an avatar is suffering through his body, it's not his own karma he's working out. He's taking the karma of his disciples, and in a way that Master himself never explains, but he says great yogis can do this. He works out that karma on his own body, and then they're freed from the necessity to live through the whole cycle of cause and effect. This is what Jesus did when he was crucified. That's why they say he died for our sins. And because Jesus was crucified, we are free. It's been dogmatized in a way that is no longer true, completely true. But the guru can still take our karma. But as Swami put it, using that physical body in that way was specifically for those who were around him at the time. So Master was using his physical body in that way, but he was suffering. And Anandamata panicked, is the only way that I can read between the lines. And I discussed this with Swami Kriyananda afterwards. Panicked and insisted on calling the doctor. Master did not want to call the doctor. Master knew this was not a medical problem that he was going through. Sometimes he called doctors, even whatever the cause was. Swami Kriyananda went to doctors a lot, but the karma of his physical body never made any sense to any physician, because if the physical body is working out karma that doesn't belong to that physical body, there's just no way to make the two match. So Anandamata panicked and insisted on calling the doctor. And then afterwards she was talking to Gyanamata about this. And Gyanamata answered very sternly to her and said, it must be very, and she used the word lonely for Master, when those closest to him don't understand. It's a very interesting thought, isn't it? But what it also implies is I know I have a number of threads running here, but what it also implies is the impersonal strength that is required for us to be able to tell the difference from an ordinary, perfectly natural response to a situation, and that response which is really going to take us toward God. Swamiji says in a certain place, willpower is the capacity to discriminate among different states of consciousness. And then I would say even after that, willpower is then the ability to direct our own awareness to the state of consciousness that we know is going to be most beneficial to us in the long run. I mean, a great many people can't even come close to the path of self-realization because it appears to them to run contrary to every source of happiness and goodness in the world. And I know I've stood up here on many occasions and spoken in ways that I believe to be true about just simply don't look to this world for happiness. And then sometimes I get emails or I get a tug on the arm, but there's so many nice things, and then people will tell me how many nice things there are. And it isn't a question of, we're not living actively, at least, in a concentration camp at this particular moment. We look around, we've come from relatively comfortable circumstances to a beautiful place. We're free to gather. We're not going to be put back in our prison cells after this is over. I mean, there are circumstances that on the face of it are more like hell than this one. So it's not that we're blind to the uplifting possibilities, but the challenge is to understand what is going to give us eternal and lasting happiness, and what is only a wave rising that will be inevitably followed by a wave that falls. But the answer to all of this also has to be, when people would ask Swami Kriyananda, do I need a guru to find God? And Swami would say, not if you don't think so. And it wasn't that he was changing the scriptural truth, is that if you don't think you need a guru, then you don't need one. I can't tell you that you need something if it doesn't already resonate with you. As Swami said in his instructions to all of us who have the responsibility, like I do, to try to talk to others about what these teachings really mean, he said, we never teach anybody anything. We just present it to them, and if they're ready inwardly to resonate with it, they recognize it. And if you don't recognize it, no amount of insisting is really going to change you. We all learn from our own experience, period. And when we're ready, we can also learn from the experience of others. I was born into a very comfortable situation with very supportive family, and I was obsessed with the necessity to find out what would make me happy. Now, you would think if I was obsessed with finding happiness that I would have been miserable. But I wasn't miserable. I was actually quite a cheerful little person, just sort of went through life. But there was this deep karmic memory of all the lifetimes in which, as Master put it, he said, reincarnation is perfectly designed because if life were absolute hell, we would want to have nothing to do with it. The problem is life is almost paradise. And it's always just a little bit short. If only I had married so-and-so first instead of marrying that one first. If only we'd had children. If only the sun hadn't been such a lemon. If only the investment had worked out, if only we'd bought at the low part of the market instead of the high part of the market, Just always think about it. Think about your own life. It's always almost okay, isn't it? And so what happens to us, we keep thinking. And Master said that's why we incarnate over and over again, because it almost worked. And we just figure it out, we get it organized in our mind, and we just try it one more time. We pick a different set of parents, we pick Aunt Jane to be my mother instead of the mother that I got, whatever it might be. And then we push it all to the limit and see if we can finally get there. And eventually, and why not now, but eventually, what happens to us is not really that the world looks any uglier to us, but we begin to realize that the one consistent factor in this experience is my own inner perception. You see? It's just my own inner perception. Because it's fascinating to look around at what people think is pleasurable. The people that they fall in love with, the ones, the houses that they choose to live in, the way they decorate, the clothes that they wear, the hairdos that they wear, the jewelry they think is pretty. Everybody looks at it differently. I've been a vegetarian for so long that when I'm in a restaurant and somebody has delivered a huge piece of steak, I feel so embarrassed for them. Just really embarrassed in this public place, maybe in the privacy of their own home, but here, like this. And then I have to remember that it's perfectly natural to them. In fact, they're observing it with enthusiasm. I visited a relative's house once, and the concept of near beer was something that was around sometime, which is non-alcoholic, and was never a great passion of mine, but I was in a relative's house, and I went in the refrigerator, and I pulled out this bottle, and I opened it, and I was drinking some of it, and I thought, wow, this is the best one I've ever had. And so I looked at the label, of course, and it was Miller or something like that, because these relatives had real beer in their refrigerator. It never crossed my mind that someone would have actual beer in their refrigerator. It's just like, here we are, we're all so different. So, but what we begin to, so that would be the last time I had a drink. I was driving home from Ananda Village once at 2 in the morning, because I would stay up there like till after Swami's Saturday night programs were over, and then come down here for Sunday service. And the road was a little bumpy, and there was no one on the highway, so I was changing lanes fairly often. Pretty soon there's a red light behind me. This policeman pulls me over and starts asking me questions like, what day of the week is it? Who is the president? I'm looking at him like, what? And finally this is just a young police officer, finally it crosses my mind. I said, I haven't had a drink since 1965. And I looked at him, I said, you weren't even born in 1965, were you? I said, so we straightened it out, but never crossed my mind, just even the mere thought of intoxication out of the question. Because the consistent fact is what our inner reality is. It's what we project from inside ourselves and then imagine is feeding us happiness. You see? And that is what we're working with. It's not really a question of whether marriage is good or bad, having children is good or bad, having a nice home is good or bad, following this career, none of that. The mistake is when we think that what is reflecting back to us, the enthusiasm we're giving to it, is actually the source. And you see, that's what we chase. That's why we reincarnate time after time. We are literally the source of our own happiness. And I don't mean in an egoic sense, I get whatever I want. That's not the point at all. We are made of bliss. When we put aside all other limiting conditions, we discover that what's left is bliss. We condition our happiness and think we're unhappy. But the truth of it is, we're always blissful. We just take it away because we have this very confused idea that it comes from what I'm projecting toward. It's like the source of light is here and everything is made of tinfoil. And so we project this light out and that one shines and that one shines, but we put tinfoil on all different things depending on who we are, never realizing that all of those things could be let go. And the bliss would not only still be present, but it would be greater because it would be unconditioned. Right now, you see, we're so vulnerable, aren't we? And that's as a child, from whatever I was born with, whatever memories, samskars I had, I just remembered how many times it hadn't worked out. And that's what happens to us, the soul's long journey. And it wasn't that it worked out because it was horrible, but it was just never quite enough. In fact, Swamiji has often told us, disappointment teaches us something, but fulfillment teaches us more. Because as long as we can imagine, if I only had that, then I would be happy, then we have all this incentive to keep trying to get it. But the anguishing, terrifying disappointment is when we actually have it. Because as long as we have defined ourselves by something other than the source, the true source of our own bliss, then we're always vulnerable. Because this is an ephemeral world. No matter how long we live 100 years, we live 150 years, whatever it is, but sooner or later, it all just goes away. Again, I remember in not my childhood, but just as I was coming on the path, really contemplating the fact of death, which in our society we're so separated from. When we first went to India, and we're on the Ganges in Varanasi, and we got up early in the morning to see the sunrise over the Ganges and say the Gayatri mantras. This is very ancient tradition, which was incredibly evocative of past lives. It was marvelous. And then we took the boat over to here, to the burning ghat, which is right on the river. And we just watched. There they are. People carry their dead relatives in these little litters through the streets and put them on the wood there, and then the fire is ignited, and then the relatives stand around and watch the body burn. And we as tourists on the boat were just watching all of this. And it was in India, especially 30 years ago, everything that was hidden in America was out in the open there. It's a wholly different culture. But we just watched the bodies burn. I mean, it sounds absurd. I loved it. I just loved it. It was so magnificently real, and just you're really feeling like, this is the reality behind all of the superficial that we're playing all the time. We're always just pretending. And there we were sitting in that boat. Just a few years later, we used to take that trip every year or two, and took groups over there for 20 years. And I got very used to it. We all got very used to the whole thing. And when we're always trying to adjust the schedule just so. And when will we eat? When will we meditate? How will we go here? So we had this great idea. We'll get up really early. We'll get onto the boats at 5 o'clock. We'll have the sun come up over the Ganges. Then we'll go down to the burning ghat, and then we'll have breakfast. So we actually took the boat down to the burning ghat. Now, of course, I'm very comfortable with all this by now, but many of the people in the boat have never been to India and they've never seen the burning ghat. I have my back to the burning ghat, and I'm passing out boxes full of breakfast. And there's a certain lack of enthusiasm to the people, because they're being given a hard-boiled egg and a piece of toast, and they're supposed to sit there and chew it while they watch bodies burning. And finally, it's a macabre, you'll have to forgive me. And finally I looked over my shoulder and I thought, maybe this isn't the best picnic spot. No. So we put the boxes down and waited until a little later. But on the other hand, why not? Great yogis would often go to cremation grounds. Sri Ramakrishna would go in the middle of the night to the cremation ground. And he would go there not because it brought his consciousness down, but why is death less beautiful than birth? Why is old age and the dissolution of these wonderful bodies less to be desired than to be young? And I remember Ananda standing up in front of a group of young people at Ananda Village, and he says, enjoy those bodies while they're still working so well. Just like that. Because time will pass. But why is one less beautiful than the other? Because we have taken the unconditioned bliss of our hearts, and we think that what's reflected back to us is the source. And because we cannot control what's outside ourselves and what's reflected back to us, we are always vulnerable, and therefore on some level always afraid. Just always afraid. Think of the toll that takes on us. Even in the midst of the greatest happiness, we know, I can't make this last forever. So there's two choices in that. One is that we become cynical and morose, and often, as people do, incredibly self-protective, and just not willing, this is enough. I have enough of sorrow and enough of happiness, and I'm just going to stop here. But that's not what we see in the saints. You see, and that's why the masters come. That's not what we see. What we see instead is this wild abandon of joy. What do I have to be afraid of? Because you see, it's the fear that causes all of that. But if we understand that his master called it so sweetly, he had such marvelous turns of phrase, you have within you a portable paradise, is what he called it. I just love that picture. And I sometimes see myself as this little box, this sort of well-designed little box, that I can unpack it, and inside is a portable paradise. Isn't that marvelous? If we have within us a portable paradise, what do we ever have to fear? So if what is coming back to us is beautiful, sweet, loving friendship, physical beauty, the world's beauty, natural beauty, wonderful. If what's coming back to us is many children of God having to learn hard lessons and going through challenging times while they have the experiences that they need in order to discover that they have within them a portable paradise, if I'm living only from what's reflected back, then I suffer. If I'm living from what radiates forth from me, what do I have to fear? And there's about 1,000 dangling threads on this particular sermon, which would take me much too long to tie together. So we're just going to leave them on the table, and we'll pick them up some other time. God bless you.